Hello, everyone. I hope that you are having a wonderful weekend. I just got back from Asheville and it was very cold. Not that Charlotte is much cooler, or warmer rather, but I hope that you are enjoying the change of seasons. And I know it's a busy time of year for all of you, whether you have your own students that you're taking care of in addition to your work at Winthrop. So I realize that we're all busy, and I wanted to say that you continue to do a wonderful job. I particularly enjoy reading the discussion board posts from this class. You guys have done a good job really interacting with each other, and I'll dig a little bit deeper into that in a minute. But first, I wanted to make a blanket announcement. I did send an email about this previously, but the course schedule for the remainder of the semester changed very, very slightly, but I did post an updated schedule in the course informations tab, that red tab on the left. And any of the dates that are slightly different, I highlighted or wrote in red. And I'll talk about dates at the end of this video, but just wanted to make that blanket statement in case you printed out the syllabus. I would encourage you to look at that new syllabus and print that one out because the dates changed just a little bit. So this week we will be wrapping up our discussion on creativity. It is a dream of mine to one day teach a creativity theories class. I could talk about this forever. And mainly because I think that creativity is often misused in the classroom because it's seen as something in addition to learning, when I really think creativity is a good vehicle for learning, like I mentioned with that incubation model of teaching, or the Torrance incubation model of teaching in last week's video. So this week's case study is yet again a true story. So we have a fairly new teacher. We have Veronica. She's working in a creative writing class, and she asks her students to work in small groups, draw out random items such as a pen and a coaster, and let's see what else we got here. And it's remote control. So she has them draw 3 things out of the pillowcase and decide, what can I make out of these 3 items to create a magical device to then be part of my creative writing piece. This sounds like a lot of fun, but I can tell you from experience that especially high achieving students are going to be very intimidated by this. So if you think way back to the beginning of the semester, we talked about that delineation between high achievers and gifted students. And when gifted students, their minds are just acting very differently. They're experiencing the world differently. High achievers are more, they just kind of do everything by the rules. They're the ones probably stereotypically in the front of the classroom. They're trying to get everything done on time. They're trying to please the teacher. When you give them a very open-ended assignment like this, they don't know how to please you, so it kind of freaks them out. So definitely some form of scaffolding is needed. A couple of things right off the bat that jump out at me is the student statement that, oh, well, this is just for art class. What are we doing? Why are we doing this, quote, creative thinking in this class? We only should be doing this in art class. And that points to this kind of bias that we have called the art bias, thinking that if we're not artistic, then we can't be creative. So I want to highlight a few things that most of you said. The majority of you suggested that we start with a definition of what creativity means. I think that's an excellent place to start. When we ask students to do things, but we don't define them, we're really doing them a disservice. So in the creativity research world, we call that providing explicit instructions. So there's actually been research done on giving one group a set of directions that says, try to think of ideas that no one else would think of. And then another set being more of the control, and it just says, list of as many ideas as possible. And that slight change in explicit instruction of think of ideas that no one else would think of does promote more creative thinking. The concept behind explicit instruction is really simple. If you think about, I want to know how high a student can jump, I'm not going to say to the student, hey, jump. I'm going to tell them, I want you to jump as high as you can, because you want to be explicit about your expectations. So something really important in terms of encouraging creativity is first defining it. Think back to our first couple of weeks in class when we went through those myths and realities. We did the same thing, but we had to define giftedness. Now, you quickly realize that there's not one clear definition of giftedness, but it does help to go through these various definitions and at least get an idea of the construct. And the same thing goes for creativity. The majority of you mentioned starting off the conversation by providing this definition of creativity. I wanted to point out Allison actually suggested having the students research creativity and then report back about what it means. I think that's a very powerful way to approach this, would definitely be successful. Also, that act of researching and then synthesizing all of the materials, very critical thinking. If designed correctly, that itself could even provide creative thinking, or require creative thinking rather. But when it comes from the peers, it's a lot more believable than when it comes from the instructor. So I really like that idea of having the students research, what does creativity mean, what does it not mean, and that way they can kind of educate themselves and educate each other. So I completely agree. Starting out with the definition of creativity is important. On the flip side of that, I really think it's important to always provide a definition of creativity. But on the other side of the coin, we need a definition of discretion, meaning when should I use these creative thinking skills? Sometimes I get some pushback on that, but it is important that we help students see when these creative thinking skills are more, quote, appropriate, and also when they may not be as appropriate. So, for example, just to kind of give me some anecdotal evidence, one of my mentors is Dr. Bonnie Crammond, who I'm sure you read several of her pieces. One of the videos, I think it was the TED Talk, is by Dr. Crammond. She's wonderful. She does a lot of work in consulting with creativity. So actually, she got a phone call from Delta, like Delta Airlines, a couple years ago. It was when I was still at the University of Georgia. And apparently they said, well, we want our pilots to be more creative. And Bonnie, she kind of laughed and she said, I'm not sure I want that. I kind of want my pilot to really work inside of the box and land the plane. So we had a good laugh about that. And I think that is a good illustration of discretion. On a standardized test, when there is one answer, sometimes you need creative thinking to get to that answer, but sometimes you need to use some discretion and think, okay, what is the correct answer, because I can only provide one answer, and it is important in this case to provide, quote, the best answer. I think it's also important on the flip side because children and adults think that creativity is really confined to art, or confined not just to visual arts, but also to music, to performing arts. They neglect to see that there's creativity in math. They neglect to see there's creativity in science, creativity in engineering. And another bias that I think is responsible for that is what we call the product bias. So when we are biased toward we can only be creative if we have a final product. One of you, I believe it was Drew, did a good job mentioning that. So she said, well, we need to have a conversation with these students, help them see that creativity is more than just this end product, but it's the whole process. So the students need to realize, hey, I'm not just being creative because I'm putting together the pen and the remote control and making something. It's the thought process, in the writing process, in the conversation that I'm having with my other peers. That whole process is creative. So it's important that we don't have that just product bias against what creativity really is. I wanted to share with you one really fun way to illustrate creative thinking. So if you've seen this, it will be familiar, but hopefully you haven't seen this because I think this is a really powerful way to show creativity. So this is called the 9-dot problem. It's pretty famous. So the challenge is using 4 lines and never picking up your writing utensil. Connect all 4 of the, or I'm sorry, all 9 of the dots. So 4 lines, never pick up your pencil or your pen, connect all of them. Actually pause it, see if you can do this. I'll do the awkward waiting. This is usually the first thing I see students do. They box it in. Remember, this is, if we think back to those creative thinking skills, this is not showing flexibility. This is really showing, or not showing resistance to premature closure. So our minds immediately want to box this in, okay? So clearly, it's not possible if we are just thinking within these lines. One of the most common solutions is right here. Okay, so we've only got 4 lines. I'm sorry, the train is going by. 4 lines, never picked up my pencil, but notice I had to go outside of the box. That is where the term outside of the box comes from, the 9-dot problem. You have to go outside of the box in order to actually solve this problem. I've worked with kids a while with this. I've seen a couple of other ones. One of my favorites is the student will draw one huge line and say, well, I can connect all 9 with one line. Never said how big the line had to be. I've also had students do some really interesting folding and then like pierce the paper and say, well, I connected them with one line, but it was like this. So there's multiple solutions, but the key is you have to think outside of this box. Whenever I'm talking to students about creativity and I'm doing this direct instruction like you guys suggested, I always start there because it helps them have a visual image of, oh, I didn't have to think inside of those lines, but I just made this box for myself. And it's also cool because there's a history of that thinking outside of the box. So beyond starting with the definition, wanted to give you that quick little fun teaching activity. Several of you also mentioned scaffolding, which I totally agree with. If these students are doing pretty closed assignments and then all of a sudden Veronica's having them do what is a pretty extensive creative writing strategy, they probably need some scaffolding. I will say, this is not my favorite creative activity. This creative activity is very product-oriented. I would rather see more creativity in the writing process. So this is off the top of my head, but one more creative writing activity that I've done that I do enjoy is what's called a force fit. So a force fit, if any of you want to use this for this week's assignment, go for it. A force fit is literally when you force ideas together that don't seem to belong. I've seen this done in a K4 classroom where the students have to draw 2 stuffed animals out of a bag, and they talk about what would happen if you had a crocodile and a cat and it becomes a crocodile cat, and they talk about where would the crocodile cat live and what would the crocodile cat eat and would it be dangerous, forcing 2 different ideas together. That strategy, that force fit strategy, gets super higher order when we use it in content. So for example, I can see like in a science class, we can be talking about different types of cells and like, what if we force fit the cell wall in a plant cell to the animal cell? Those things don't go together. There's a difference between plant and animal cells. What is that going to do? I've seen, what if we force fit 2 characters from 2 novels we've studied together? What if we force fit a historical figure 100 years ago into today's political environment? You're forcing 2 different ideas together. I think a strategy like that, where you're really forcing the students to use that creative process, would probably be a little bit more appropriate in this case. The way that this assignment is structured, it seems like the product is like tangential. So they're just going to make the product and then write about it. But imagine if they had to force fit that product into 2 different novels that they wrote. Or if it became, if it somehow became the gate between the 2 novels. See what I'm trying to get at? Not just saying, here's an assignment plus a creative component. Here's an assignment that uses creativity as the vehicle for learning. Several of you mentioned scaffolding. I think that doing creativity warm-ups is really helpful. I can't remember who to credit for this, but I know one of you mentioned doing brain busters is what it was called, or boosters rather, where the students are practicing these creative thinking skills. Again, discretion. They need to see, oh, these fun creative thinking skills I'm learning in the morning can be used in math, science, English, and history class. They've got to see the connection. Otherwise, they just think that creativity is something that's just extra. I do think if this assignment were to be kept the way it was, there needs to be more scaffolding. So she needs to give a little bit more direction on what this type of device is, probably give them more steps to go through. Otherwise, her students are going to remain pretty overwhelmed. Some of you mentioned doing some scaffolding along different creative thinking skills. So thinking fluency, lots of ideas, originality, lots of new ideas, elaboration, let's add on to our ideas and then give them as many details as possible, and then flexibility, let's have as many different types of ideas as possible. So again, I think all of those are definitely useful. Both Cynthia and both Cynthia and Christy mentioned trying to tie this creativity more into the content. For example, Cynthia was saying, let's connect these domain skills of plot and climax and etc. To provide more scaffolding. So they're seeing, oh, there's a combination between this creative writing content that I'm used to and now this very creative kind of out there activity. I think that's really important. Again, it's all about the transfer of those creative thinking skills. Cynthia also mentioned providing more time. And of course, the fancy word for that is incubation. In a creativity world, we kind of joke that we say incubation, but we really are procrastinating. So again, incubation is that moment when we let the problem kind of simmer for a little bit. My favorite example of this is you're trying to finish a crossword puzzle. You can't remember the word. You know the word. You're really annoyed. You're drinking coffee. You're annoyed. You can't remember. You finally put the crossword puzzle down. Go outside. All of a sudden, you know 26A. And because of that, you have this beautiful light bulb moment called illumination. Well, what comes before illumination is incubation. And incubation is that non-conscious thought process. So our ideas are percolating in our head. So one of the reasons why we have trouble encouraging deep thinking in our schools, because we don't provide time for incubation. So one of my favorite suggestions, who do I give credit to this? I can't remember. One of you, who shall be unnamed, but I thought this was an excellent idea, suggested let's make this more of a long-term assignment. So something that went for more than one unit so the students could incubate on their ideas, and also that could promote some elaboration and also some resistance to premature closure. So you don't want the students to go directly with their very first ideas. So I thought, again, that was a really good assignment. As I was grading these, or reading, I haven't graded them yet because it's Sunday afternoon, you've still got time. As I was reading through these, I kept thinking about how you had really good classroom examples. And sometimes in the world of gifted education, using creative thinking in the classroom is intimidating. And to approach your administrator and say, hey, I want to do these creative thought-provoking lessons, or hey, I want to promote ability grouping, or hey, I think we should do some more acceleration. When you guys did your gifted education critique, I got a sense of frustration in terms of like, have so much to do, but we can't fix it. So for some reason, I was really inspired by this week's discussion post because I thought about, oh, they have really good in the classroom scaffolding ideas. And what happens a lot of times in education is things kind of had to trickle up. So did you hear what they're doing in Miss McCallum's classroom or Mr. Smith's classroom? They did this really cool activity and I never thought about it like that. And the kids keep talking and the parents start talking and the teachers start talking and eventually it kind of climbs up. So I do think that these types of activities in the classroom, number one, it would be a great way to identify potentially gifted students, but also I think it's a good starting place in terms of hopefully providing some change in mindset. So great job on this. This week's assignment, again, related to creativity, is a good connection between this case study. So for this week, I'm asking you to create a creativity how-to guide. And really what I'm looking for is a one-page description of a creative teaching strategy. This can literally be whatever you want. Some common ones I've seen are Scamper is a great activity. Force Fit is a great activity. Oh goodness, there's so many. Storyboarding, online storyboarding, analogous thinking, creative problem solving. There's actually CPS is its own method. There's a lot of different creative teaching strategies out there. I don't want to give too many. So what your topic is for this week is to find a creative teaching strategy, either that you've used in your classroom or one that you would like to use, and write up a how-to guide about how you could potentially use this in your classroom. A couple of important dates, and these are written on Blackboard, but I did want to emphasize them. So you need to tell me the topic for your how-to guide by November 14th, okay? So the reason for that, I want it by the 14th because only 2 people can do the same strategy. I don't want like 20 of you doing Force Fit because then when you go to download each other's how-to guides, you're going to have 20 Force Fit examples, which isn't really helpful. So by the 14th, all you've got to do is tell me what the strategy is you would like to use. By the 16th, which is Friday, I'd like you to post the guide. And then by Sunday, the 18th, you need to review at least 2 of them. So this assignment will look a little bit different when you go to submit. I'm actually going to have you submit them on a discussion board post. So the reason for that is because that way you can look at each other's assignments on that discussion board and react to each other's. So it will be set up just like all of our other discussion posts, except for you're not writing a discussion post. All you're doing is saying, here's my creativity how-to guide on Force Fit, and attaching the document. That way it's available to all of us. I would encourage you to look at each other's work. You do need to respond to at least 2 of your classmates' work, but I would say think about responding to more than that. So just to clarify, by the 14th, we want your topic. By the 16th, the guide itself. And by Sunday, the 18th, the reactions to that guide. If you have any trouble trying to think of a topic, then of course, just approach me and email me, and I'd be glad to help. A couple of other announcements as we get to the end of the semester. So as I've been talking about, your final project is a special topics presentation. Several of you have already emailed me about different topics and ideas that you would like to research, and I think you've got some great ones. Just to maybe put some of you at ease, if for some reason 20 of you guys want to do your special topics presentation on the same thing, that doesn't bother me. I want you to choose the topic that you are most interested in. So I'm not concerned about overlapping topics for special topics, but I am for the how-to guide. So just to kind of get you thinking, we've got this week, and then we have Thanksgiving. Over Thanksgiving, your only assignment is to tell me your topic for the special topics presentation, and that will be due on the 20th. So just tell me what you're thinking about researching by then. And then the actual project will be due November 30th. So you do have some time, but I just like to give kind of an overview so you can know where we're headed. Again, there is a slightly revised schedule on that course information tab. And I hope that you guys have a wonderful week. And of course, I'm always here to answer any questions and continue some really critical conversations that we're having. Thank you.